I am a doctor, always working long hours at the hospital day and night. As a doctor, I often see puzzling things that I have to dismiss and continue my work. However, there is one experience that has stayed with me and will forever remain in my memory. Publicly, if asked about believing in anything beyond what science can explain, I would say no. But now, I have the chance to share something that has deeply puzzled me. One day, I was checking on a patient who had been suffering from severe headaches for a long time. She kept repeating that they were in control. Concerned, I had the nurse give her some medication for the pain and suggested she be sent to the psychiatric ward. She didn't object to this treatment, but she was very insistent that she didn't want to be left alone. Curious and wanting to understand more, I asked her who they were. She told me that they were reptile demons, who planned to take her soul if she wasn't careful. She explained that these beings had been tormenting her for years, and that she had been trying her best to fight them off, but they were far too powerful. I tried to comfort her and assured her that we would take care of her, but she pleaded with me not to leave her alone. I spoke with the nurses, and we decided to keep a close watch on her and make sure someone was always nearby. We also increased her pain medication to help ease her symptoms. Over the next few days, I checked on her regularly, and she seemed to be getting better. She wasn't as upset and was starting to feel more at ease. The nurses reported that she hadn't been having any unusual hallucinations recently, and she even began to make friends with some of the other patients in the psychiatric ward. We thought that whatever was causing her headaches might also be causing the hallucinations, but without more tests, we couldn't be sure. I advised her to continue taking the pain medication and to inform the nurse if she started experiencing any more hallucinations or if her headaches got worse. One day, as I was walking by her room, I noticed these menacing shadows on the wall next to her bed. I stopped suddenly and took a step back to confirm what I was seeing. What I saw next still haunts me. A lizard creature looked me right in the eyes. It was nearly 7 feet tall with scaly and shiny skin. It had enormous claws and piercing yellow cat-like eyes, and these eyes seemed to look right into my soul. I wanted to run, but it felt like my feet were stuck to the floor. The last thing I remember before I fainted was its forked tongue flicking in and out of its mouth. When I woke up, the nurses were gathered around my bed with worried expressions. They asked me what had happened, and all I could do was tell them to check on the patient's room. A security guard later explained to me that the patient was nowhere to be found. Her sheets were torn to pieces and covered in blood. We never saw or heard from that patient again. We had to call her family and explain that she had left the building and that we were actively searching for her. To this day, her family is still looking for her, but my intuition tells me that nobody will ever see her again. Did the reptile demons succeed in taking her soul? The skeptic in me wants to say that she lost her mind, scratched herself badly, ran out of the hospital and met a tragic end somewhere, but my intuition tells me that the truth is impossible to explain. I keep trying to convince myself that I saw the reptile demon because my patient had mentioned it earlier and I must have imagined it. I keep telling myself that I worked too many hours, saw things that weren't there, and collapsed from exhaustion. But that's not how I experienced it, and I can still remember every detail of the lizard creature. I haven't even told my spouse that this happened to me, and I really thought I was going to take this experience to my grave. At the very least, this was an event that can't be explained with logic or science. Do I think there are aliens out there? A Bigfoot in the woods? Or an afterlife? I still say no because there is not enough evidence for any of those things. Do I think there are lizard people controlling the government? Absolutely not. It simply sounds too absurd and made up. Do reptilians exist in any capacity? No, the only reptiles are just that, reptiles. Did I see a lizard creature in my patient's room? Undeniably, yes. That's why it bothers me so much even today. Everything I know and believe tells me that what I saw should not have been real, but I remember it like it happened yesterday, and now when people share their paranormal experiences, my ears perk up. I feel it is necessary to include that I'm not on any medication, and wasn't on any at the time of my encounter with what my patient referred to as a reptile demon. I hadn't seen anything like that before this event, and haven't seen anything that unusual since. I don't expect to see anything this strange ever again, but the hospital has never felt the same to me since. My patients often share the wildest stories with me about what goes on in their rooms, and sometimes I want to share my experience with them to let them know they aren't crazy. But I never will. If I were in the hospital and my doctor said he saw a 7-foot lizard creature in my room, I would definitely want to find another doctor. Maybe someday we'll be able to share our personal experiences without fear of what others might think. Until then, I'll keep listening to your channel with mixed feelings and try to keep an open mind. Thinking about that night still makes me freeze up. It was a very scary experience, and I still don't know what kind of creature I saw. It happened late in the summer when my significant other and I decided to spend one last weekend at my family's cabin. We took separate cars because my partner had to work late. I arrived at the cabin around 3 in the afternoon. After unloading a few things, I took a look around. There were a few other cabins within walking distance from ours, but no one seemed to be home. I was happy about this because it meant we wouldn't have to worry about anyone else being loud. The neighbors directly across from us had kids in college and often used their cabin to have parties, so I was relieved they weren't there. Once I settled in, I started a fire in the fire pit and decided to read for a bit. After about an hour, I put out the fire and went back inside to tidy up before my partner arrived. There was plenty of cleaning to do around the house. After what felt like another hour, I was finally ready to prepare dinner. While gathering everything I needed, I remembered that I had left some canned ingredients in my car, so I went out to get them. By this time, the sun was starting to hide behind some clouds as night approached. When I stepped outside, I was surprised to see that the fire pit was still burning. I walked over to turn it off and started to wonder why it was still on. I was sure I had put it out before going inside. I shrugged it off, thinking that maybe I hadn't done it properly. After I grabbed what I needed from my car and thought about what just happened, I started to hear music. I looked over and, to my surprise, saw that the rowdy neighbors across the way had just arrived at their cabin. I laughed to myself, thinking that now they were going to be noisy all night. At the same time, I felt a bit relieved since my partner hadn't arrived yet, and now I wasn't totally alone. After I went back inside to continue preparing dinner, my significant other texted me to say they would be there soon. I decided to go back outside to turn the fire pit on again. I sat down in my chair, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing at the neighbor's cabin. I squinted beyond the fire, trying to see who it was. As I glanced over, I saw what looked like the outline of a person, so I waved, thinking it was my neighbor. The figure stopped for a moment before waving back. Even though it was dark and late, I decided I would say hello properly tomorrow. My partner arrived not long after, and we went to bed. I woke up around midnight and went to the kitchen for some water. From the window, I could see the neighbors across the way, relaxing in their hot tub with music playing. I figured they probably wouldn't be up early enough for me to greet them in the morning, so I planned to go over later in the evening. We didn't know our neighbors too well, but whenever one of us was at the cabin, we always greeted each other out of politeness. My partner and I spent the morning exploring before returning to the cabin. After taking a shower and getting cozy for the evening, I remembered that I was supposed to go say hello to our neighbors. It was about 3 p.m. when I knocked on their door. Normally, I would hear someone moving inside, getting ready to answer, but this time it was quiet. I glanced at their driveway and saw their cars, so I knew they were still around. I guess they might have stayed up late and were still asleep, or perhaps they had gone off to explore the trails. Either way, it didn't seem too concerning, so I decided to head back. As I turned to walk back, I noticed footprints on the ground. I looked across to my fire pit and realized that's where I saw my neighbor standing last night. Curious, I examined the footprint. It looked like a human footprint, but much bigger. I started to feel a bit worried, thinking that maybe this print belonged to a bear. It wasn't common for bears to be in that area, but it had happened before. I decided to knock on their door again, feeling the need to warn them to be careful. This time I knocked louder, and the door creaked open a bit. I quickly glanced back at my cabin, thinking I should ask my partner to come with me to check it out. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to take a peek inside. I went in quietly, looking around and trying to figure out what I would say to the neighbor if they caught me in their cabin. After searching through 3 of the 4 rooms, I figured they must be out exploring. But something inside me felt like I needed to check that 4th room. I walked down the hall to it, and as I got closer, I noticed a strange smell. When I opened the door, I saw that the room was a mess. The sheets on the bed and the mattress itself were torn up, like a wild animal had been inside and wreaked havoc. As I looked around, I thought I should clean up a bit, because if the neighbors caught me in here, they might think I did it. As I started to tidy up, I noticed some red stains. As I pulled up more blankets and fluff from that area, I suddenly dropped everything and froze. My heart pounded fast when I saw what looked like animal remains of a leg. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I stepped back until I was wedged behind the door. I couldn't move, feeling completely scared. Downstairs, I heard trotting, like something was running fast. Even though I could hear it, I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't know who or what might come through the door. My eyes widened as a tall, furry-looking beast sniffed around the torn sheets. The creature dug into the mess where I had found the foot. It snarled, and I could hear it crunching on the leg, like a dog does when it chews on a bone. Thankfully, it took what it wanted and ran away, not even noticing me there. I was still in shock, trying to process what I had just seen. The only thing that brought me back to reality was when my partner pulled me out of the cabin. When we got back to our cabin, I couldn't speak for the first half hour. Eventually, I told my partner about what I had seen, and they agreed that it was probably best not to say anything to the neighbors. Later that evening, when I had a chance to calm down, we heard the neighbors come back home, but this time, instead of loud music, we heard cries. It turned out that they had left their dog behind at home. I felt terrible knowing that I had seen the dog's remains, but couldn't offer them any comfort or closure about what had happened. For a long time, I wrestled with the idea of telling them, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I thought about telling them the truth for a long time, but I was worried about how they would feel. It was a tough decision, and I struggled with it for a while. I hope you'll consider sharing my story on your show. It's important for people to be cautious when they go hiking in the woods. You never know what you might come across, so it's essential to be careful. I'm a college student from Indiana, and I love going back home. It's a happy place for me because my family is there, and I still have many friends from when I was younger, even though I go to school out of state. One of my favorite places to visit when I'm home is Mill Race Park. When I was a kid, people told us to stay away from it because it was considered unsafe, but when I started high school, the city made a big effort to make it better. They called it turning it into a diamond. They made some big changes, like adding bright red metal structures. Now the park has a boathouse, a lookout over the river, a pier for fishing, an amphitheater, and clean bathrooms. It's much nicer than it used to be. During my freshman year's spring break, I decided to save money and skip the fancy tropical vacations my friends were going on. Instead, I wanted to relax and take it easy for a week. So I hopped on a plane and landed in Columbus late one Saturday night. Seeing my family and a few friends was nice, but after a few days of lazing around watching TV and scrolling through my phone, I started to feel bored. That's when I got the idea to go for a bike ride, so I put on my biking gear and pulled out my old mountain bike from the garage. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, just wanted to avoid the busy highway. Looking back, maybe sticking to the main road would have been safer. Anyway, I decided to head to Mill Race Park and explore around there. As I arrived at the park, I was amazed by how beautiful it was. Families were out enjoying picnics, people were walking their dogs, and others were biking like me. Being in the park made me feel proud of my hometown. It was like a symbol of all the great things about where I grew up. As I pedaled through the park, lost in my own thoughts, I wasn't paying much attention to where I was going. Suddenly, I found myself at a dead end without realizing it. There was only one old picnic table, so I decided to take a break and sit down. I reached for my phone to figure out where I was, but to my dismay, it was dead. Feeling lost in a place I thought I knew well started to make me feel a bit nervous. It might sound silly, but I truly had no clue how I ended up there. After taking a few deep breaths to calm myself down, I realized that if I turned around, I might find my way back to somewhere familiar. That seemed like the best option. Just as I was about to set off again, I heard something. Twigs snapping, footsteps crunching through the woods. Whatever it was moving cautiously, and the steps sounded heavy, like those of a grown man. Moving slowly, I looked around the woods, trying to spot whatever was making those sounds, but there was nothing in sight. I circled near the picnic table, still seeing nothing. Feeling a bit spooked, I decided to pedal away on my bike, but after going a short distance, I found myself huffing and puffing. When I turned to check my back wheel, I realized it was flat. As I tried to brake, I accidentally hit them too hard and ended up tumbling over my handlebars. Luckily, I was wearing my helmet, so I didn't get hurt badly. Though I had a few scrapes and bruises, I managed to pick myself up and sit by the side of the road for a moment to recover. That's when I heard those noises again, twigs snapping and careful footsteps in the woods, this time very close, just behind me. Summoning all my courage, I turned around and saw it. It was about 10 feet away with the body of a person standing on two legs. It was huge, over 7 feet tall, and its hands had large claws. The smell coming from it was awful, like rotten eggs. It looked straight at me, and when our eyes met, it hissed loudly. Then it started moving towards me, first slowly, then picking up speed. Without thinking about my bike or my injuries, I dashed down the path as fast as my legs could carry me. Every step I took, I could hear the creature's feet pounding on the ground behind me. The foul smell filled my nose, making me cough, but I didn't slow down. About 100 yards ahead, I spotted an intersection with people riding bikes. Suddenly, the thing grabbed onto my shirt and pulled me down as I tried to flee. I stumbled and fell onto the road. When I turned around, it was towering over me with big, human-like eyes and sharp teeth. Now that I'm back in school, I remember kicking it in the knees and running back to the busier part of the park. When I got home, I told my family about what happened. They could see how scared I was, so my dad went back to get my bike. But when he returned, he said he couldn't find it. It was like it had vanished into thin air. I shared this experience with a friend, and they suggested I tell it on your show. I just want everyone to be careful and stay alert when they're out in the woods. Working on a building site near the Mexican border was my job, and we were making a new place where people could live together, I think. I didn't really think much about it. My job was to make the ground ready and put up the beginnings of the building. What happened after that wasn't my concern. Some guys on the team grew up on the reservation nearby, and they refused to work on this project. They said the land was cursed. One of these guys was my friend, and I asked him about it, but he wouldn't explain. He just told me to stay away from the job. But we both needed the money, so it must have been something serious for him to give up the job. I don't believe in ghosts or bad luck, but something felt off about this. It all started with small things. Things you might not notice if you weren't paying close attention. First, there were snakes. They were just harmless garter snakes, but suddenly they were everywhere on the site. It felt like they came out of nowhere, and sometimes we even found them in our trucks at the end of the day. It was strange, but we didn't think anything odd was happening. We figured we just stumbled into an area with lots of snakes, and that was it. Sometimes it made our work hard. We were about to pour the foundation, but there were so many snakes, we ended up pouring over them. But there were other strange things too. Sometimes it seemed like the sun was in the wrong spot in the sky, or sunset would come too early or too late. At first I thought my watch was wrong, but it was happening to other guys too. Once I was eating lunch in my truck. When I stepped out, suddenly it was dark like night. I didn't know what to think. I went back into my truck to get my flashlight, but as soon as I grabbed it, the sky was light again. The sun was right where it should be, directly overhead. The snake invasion lasted about a week, and then suddenly they were all gone overnight. It was strange, but we were happy they were gone. Even if you're not scared of snakes, finding them in unexpected places was a bit scary. We only had about 3 days of relief before the scorpions arrived. It was crazy. Just like the snakes, they appeared out of nowhere. We were swamped with them, and let me tell you, dealing with scorpions was much scarier than dealing with harmless snakes. It got so bad that we had to stop working until a company came to spray insecticide everywhere. It took 2 whole weeks before we could start working again. The pest control people said they'd never seen anything like it. There were hundreds of scorpions all gathered in one spot, and even after we sprayed, more kept coming. At this point, some of the crew started talking about the guys from the reservation who quit the project. They wondered if maybe they knew something we didn't. But we kept going with the job. A lot of us really needed the money and couldn't afford to say no to work, even if there were rumors about the land. After 2 days of peace at the job site, on the 3rd day, we were suddenly overwhelmed by cicadas. It was like they came out of nowhere, covering everything. We all had to hurry back to our vehicles because you couldn't see more than a foot ahead of you. It was something I'd never seen before. I knew something was wrong, and so did the rest of the crew, but no one wanted to say it out loud. I decided to find my friend from the reservation and talk to him over a drink. When I told him about what was happening, he didn't seem surprised at all. He said he couldn't speak the creature's name because saying it would attract it, but he did warn me that it was evil, and if I had any sense, I'd leave the job. He said it wasn't worth risking my life. I found it hard to believe his story, but deep down, I knew he was right, even if he wasn't. I didn't want to find out what the next problem would be if I went back to work. I had left many tools at the site that I needed to retrieve. I wasn't going to let this job take my tools away, so I went back the next day. When I arrived, I found myself all alone. No one else had come to work either. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The cicadas had vanished without a trace. I began packing up my tools and loading them into my truck when I noticed something moving in the distance. It was a small gray shape, heading my way. I paused and watched closely until it came closer. It turned out to be a coyote, just one, all by itself. It trotted straight toward me. I grabbed a hammer from my tool bag just in case. The coyote stopped about 20 yards away and sat down, staring right at me. I kept loading my tools into the truck, never taking my eyes off the coyote. It didn't look away either. Its eyes almost seemed human-like. I'd seen many coyotes before, but there was something off about this one. I didn't really want to know what it was. After loading up my tools, the coyote was still there, staring at me. Just as I was about to climb into my truck, it glanced at me, threw its head back, and let out a laugh. I don't know what that creature was, but it definitely wasn't a coyote. I drove away and never returned. Our family went on a hiking vacation many years ago. My parents love hiking, and we have photos of when we were babies strapped to their chests on mountains. Usually we hike in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, but this time, Mom wanted to go to Maine for a change. My dad grew up in Bangor, so it was like going back to his hometown after many years. We squeezed into our SUV and drove north for about 8 hours. In the back, my 2 brothers and I had our legs all tangled up with our hiking gear in the trunk. Dad booked us 2 sites at the Blackwoods campground, so we kids could have some privacy. On our first night, we settled in, had dinner, and checked our gear. Hiking always starts early for us, as we usually cover a lot of ground, sometimes up to 15 miles a day. The campground is on Mount Desert Island, not far from Bar Harbor, which is a popular tourist spot. The next morning, before sunrise, we all got ready and drove to the Gorham Mountain trailhead. Dad drove, and my older brother Greg fell asleep right away. The trail was just a warm-up for us, a 3.5-mile loop that we finished quickly. Dad likes to bend the rules, so he decided we should explore the north side of the island, even though there were no official hiking trails there. We parked in a secluded spot near Hull's Cove and took only the basics with us, as we didn't want to attract attention. My brothers and I love scrambling around, and Maine was perfect for that. We followed the shoreline, enjoying the rocky shores and woodlands. Mom wanted to find a quiet spot for lunch, so we headed towards Sandy Point in Eastern Bay. We got ahead of our parents and started messing around, throwing rocks at trees. Mom called out to us to quiet down, but Greg, always up for mischief, said we should go further up the shore. We ended up in a little cove, and while Ben and I were chatting, Greg went down towards the water. He came running back, signaling for us to follow him urgently, so we joined him, and he motioned for us to be quiet and hunkered down. From our hiding spot, we saw 4 naked women picking their way through the rocks by the shore. At first I thought they were just skinny dipping, but then I noticed something strange. They were chanting, and one of them had a symbol drawn on her stomach. Ben was freaked out, and I wanted to get our parents, but Greg stopped me, fearing we'd be seen. We quickly returned to the trail and waited for our parents. When they arrived, we made up a story about a bear, and we all went for ice creams in a nearby town. We didn't talk about what we saw until we were back at the campground that night. The next few days were normal, and we didn't come across anything strange, but my brothers and I still wonder about those women. Was it a cult, or just nature lovers? Either way, I hope we never encounter anything like that again.